Now, I'd like to invite Sahil Luthra to start the session on Web3, what is it and why it matters.
All right. My name is Sahil, and today I'm going to be talking on the topic Web3, why it's important and what it is basically. Um, Before I start, I'd like to, really thank everyone who's taken, their precious time in attending this session. The goal of this talk is really to demystify the term itself, understand the core principles behind what Web3 is, and see why it is, gaining all the momentum and why all the tech companies are taking a note of it. Right? And I really hope by the end of this session, everybody, with the information that will be shared in this session, will be able to, on their own decide and, have an opinion about Web3, whether it's truly an internet evolution or it's just a buzzword. So before we begin, a little bit about myself. I'm a director of engineering and blockchain practice at KiwiTech, and I'm also heading the Center of Excellence here. And really fortunate to work with a team of really sharp and bright individuals, really passionate about the space of emerging technologies. Overall, I have like 15 plus years of experience delivering different products and platforms spanning across a variety of domains and technology stacks. Specifically with KiwiTech, I've been associate for about 5 years now. And it's really been an enriching experience working alongside different startups, and it's a feeling of pride when you actually are able to help them transform their vision into real life products. Right. So without any further delay, let's take a look at the agenda of today's talk. Here is a quick preview of what we're going to be talking about. So first of all, to really appreciate what Web3 is, what are the benefits, what the vision is, and what led to it, one needs to understand the predecessors of it. So we'll start with understanding or going through the evolution of web. What was Web 1 and 2 before we get to 3? Then we'll deep dive into Web 3 core ideas and then find out why it is of relevance. What are some of the key technologies that are powering it, and some of the other technical buzzwords surrounding it. And to be able to give an honest perspective, we'll not just talk about the good things it brings to the table. We'll also highlight some of the limitations and challenges and the criticism it faces. Then we'll see where we are in this entire evolution and what to look forward to. Post that, we'll just summarize and open up for any Q&A. Right. Now, to set the context, it's been more than a significant number of years when the Web3 term itself was coined. It was coined by the Ethereum co-founder Gavin Wood, who shortly after finding releasing Ethereum in 2014 coined this term. And but there are still debates going on, on what Web3 entails or what it will eventually entail when it is mature enough. But if you go through all the explanations that different people are trying to give of Web3, you'll find a common essence or a common underlying message, which you can see at the bottom of this slide. Basically, it's an umbrella term with a variety of ideas, and the essence is that the goal of this Web3 vision is to boot out the middlemen from the internet and bring the power back in the hand of the users. So if you see on the slide, there are different definitions as different people try to explain Web3. I'll go over them one by one. So it's the internet owned by the builders or the application creators and the users, and their transactions or networking is orchestrated using tokens. Another way of putting it is it's a place where the end users are in the control, whether it is the data that they're generating or the programs that is manipulating the data or the systems that are hosting the programs. Users in this particular vision, are in control of everything, the systems, the programs, and the data. So the essence really is, it's about freedom, it's about democracy, it's about ownership, bringing the control back into the hand of the users. And another interesting explanation is Web3 is basically a reaction to the social networks that are essentially amassing, all the content that end users generate, but then these social networks end up monetizing it without giving the benefits to the user, and sometimes, also failing to secure the data that actually belongs to the users who are expecting the networks to maintain the integrity. So before we go into the three, let's see what was the Web 1, what was the Web 2. Let's look at the predecessors themselves. So Web 1 is truly the birth of the World Wide Web. World Wide Web was essentially invented by an English computer scientist, Tim Berners-Lee, in late 80s, and he was the one who created the foundations of web. Essentially, the HTML, HTTP protocol, the world, the browser, and the first website that was deployed on a server that kind of proved the entire proof of concept, and it really gained popularity once these protocols were made open to the public. And thousands and thousands of websites started springing up in a very short span of time. So this is the era of dial-up modems, if some of you remember, the basic web pages, excitement of sending emails to your friends and family. And during this time, what essentially internet was trying to do was they were trying to replicate the existing media, the computerized versions of magazines and newspapers and newsletters. So essentially, there were only few content creators who were putting the content out there for webmasters, and most of the users were pure consumers, right? So the essence, if you really have to summarize this particular phase of web, is the essence is the read-only. You could call it as a read-only phase, where most of the user was simply reading the static web pages from the net. Right? Next, is Web 2. After Web 1, Web 2 took birth, and this we could call it as a network effect. And this is the net that came into being in mid 2000s, and this is the net that we know as of today. With the advent of this net, there were advancements in high-speed communication, the global internet access, not just geographically, various devices people could interact or interconnect with any variety of devices. So the general theme of this particular phase, which is still going on, is about for the users to be able to connect and share. They leverage this, all the advancements in communication and internet access, and they are now in a position to contribute to the content, not just consume like it was the case of Web 1. And this is this was leveraged by different social media giants. So this phase of web essentially is about communities. It's about sharing. It's about user-generated content. It's about ad-driven business model. And towards the end of the decade, also streaming media, which came into being. So what really differentiates two from one is, if we call Web 1 as read-only, where people were consuming the sites, this is read and write, where as users, you can also contribute to the content. So, but with Web 2, another issue surfaced, which is, we could call it a trust issue. Now that users were able to, from wherever they are located, whichever device they were using, connect with each other, transact with each other, exchange values and information, and sometimes value being money, they needed, somebody to build the trust gap between them, somebody to actually, in case of conflicts, somebody to resolve that, or somebody that can bridge that gap. So hence, what is needed in this particular phase is intermediaries. So this is the really essence of Web 2 and the main challenge, which is basically going to lead to Web 3. We'll see later on. But to solve this particular problem, a lot of platforms emerged like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Amazon. And they bridged the trust gap between different users, and in exchange of that, they started charging fee. And what it essentially led to is a lot of centralization. These giants ended up owning all the data, and then not just the data, they started building rules, building their proprietary and closed protocols, and kind of started building a closed wall garden. So where users, even though they were generating content on these platforms, they were the ones who were generating the the content on the platforms, but they did not own the content here. All they were doing was just toiling on the properties of these giant corporations. So that's the main problem that gave birth to Web3, which we can term it as a brave new world. which is, I would say, going through the teething phase still. It is going under an evolution. Um, we can see a lot of positives, benefits, advantages of it, but at the same time, there are some challenges also, which we'll see when we come to those particular slides. But before we get into the definition of Web3 or a little bit more in detail, to compare Web2 and Web3, I'm going to use a very interesting story that I heard in one of the talks. So this is just an analogy. So assume there is a world where you do not own anything. So it's like you're naked there, but there's a lot of hotels around. So as a user, as a person, you could go to a hotel, and that's where you're given clothes, you're given some raw material based on which you can create your own assets and other things. I know that as a user you can create. But the moment you move out of the hotel, you have to return everything that you created, return your clothes, so you're naked again, right? And then you go to the next hotel, and then you start over the entire journey again. And then when you move out from there, you're naked again. So this is exactly what Web2 is. As a user, you go to a walled garden atmosphere of a certain, big organization, generate content, but the moment you move out, everything that you generated it just stays with the platform. So that's what the Web2 is. Now let's see, Gavin Wood, who's the one who coined the term Web3, how he puts Web3. So at a high level, Web3, according to him, is an alternative vision of web, where the services are not just hosted by single or limited providers. Uh, Rather, they are actually provided collectively by a peer-to-peer network of users. So every user is in some way contributing to the slice of ultimate service that is out there, and there are algorithms running behind the scenes that are doing the job of regulators and consensus. So Web3 essentially is grabbing that power which is amassed by these giant corporates and bringing it back to the users, right? The end users who are truly generating the content here. It's a way of exchanging, values and communication without the intermediaries. That's what Web3 is. But if you take out intermediaries, who's going to build the trust? What happens to that trust element? So what Web3 does is it replaces that trust element with a democratized consensus mechanism, and which is very transparent, and all the peers in the network have complete visibility into the algorithms that drives the consensus. So if Web1 was read, Web2 was read and write, Web3 is also about owning, right? It's about a decentralized and democratic version of the internet. So let's see what are some of the core ideas behind the Web3. But one thing that I should mention at this point is, Web3 behind the scenes, it leverages blockchains, the distributed ledger technologies, which is DLT, cryptocurrencies, and NFT, to really empower the users in the way we just spoke about. So the essential pillars or the core ideas behind Web3 is, it's trustless. So you don't need to depend upon any third parties or intermediaries, but there are common consensus-based algorithms running the networks, and there are incentives for the users to contribute to that, which is like a self-sustaining model. Web3 is decentralized, so there is no single owner. The control is distributed between the creators and the end users. It is permissionless, because it's a peer-to-peer network. It is not at the mercy of certain organization to let you in or to boot you out whenever they feel like. Rather, it's an equal access for everybody, and nobody gets excluded. And Web3 also advocates native payments, because behind the scene it is leveraging blockchains, and each blockchain has a native currency. So this is what is leveraged as native payments, which enables the spending and transaction. So here is a pictorial representation of what Web 1, Web 2, Web 3 are. So Web 1, like I said, it was all about consuming. Web 2 is consuming plus creation, or contributing to the content. And Web 3, it's consuming, creation, and then owning. Right? That's how we could summarize this. So why it is important, right? So some of the things you might find we've already spoken about, but since we're talking about why it is gaining the attention so much, I think it's important to go over all the things that it brings to the plate for the end users, for the application developers, for the community, that it makes sense for them. So it's about ownership. Consider a scenario, which is true also in today's world. We go to a certain website, we fill up the registration form, which is basically our personal information. And then when we do some sort of interaction, and then we go to another site, we have to do the same exercise again. So what you're really doing is, you're entering your information, you're providing your personal information, which is staying in a platform, but you don't get to take it along with you. But in case of Web3, what happens is you control your own data, which is saved in a decentralized manner. And then wherever you go, whichever application you go, you just authenticate yourself, and then the data comes with you. The network can actually, along with your identity proof, pull out all the data, and you don't need to make different copies of data. Another key aspect is identity, right? Even though you can for the public blockchains you can anonymously join, but there are using wallets, some mechanisms where you can perfectly prove your digital identity using your private keys, right? So you do have an identity, and then it goes everywhere wherever you go, and it's kept secure and secure and resistance to hacks using cryptography. Another aspect of Web3, what it brings to the application is transparency. So, in case of platforms like Facebook and all, you don't know what they're doing with the data. You don't know the rules. But in case an application is leveraging Web3, basically you get to see the code behind the platforms. You get to access the data also because it's distributed over the ledger. And like I mentioned, since it uses the most advanced form of cryptography, you have an additional benefits of highly secure mechanisms. Another few benefits, censorship resistance. I think I briefly touched upon that. So everyone can join any network wherever they wish to. There is no single parties calling the shots and preventing people from accessing the platforms or networks based on any sociological criteria. Native payments, like we spoke about, there is a native payment tied to any blockchain. So you don't need to trust on third parties and their infrastructure, like banks and payment processing gateways. You could simply use the inbuilt tokens or inbuilt currencies of the platform, and then using the browser simply do your transactions. And it encourages a more peer-to-peer governance model, which is evident from the concept. If you know what DAOs are, which are decentralized autonomous organizations, where as a community you are owning a particular organization, not a central entity, and it is the community that decides the rules and governance instead of a single party. A few other benefits that we can talk about is a seamless service. So because it's a decentralized and distributed network behind the scenes, what that means is your data is being backed up in multiple places. So there's no way a certain server goes down and you'll end up losing the service or the data. There's enough backups, enough redundancy built in. So there's always going to be a seamless data. Lastly, accessibility. So your information, no matter where you're located, which device you're using, you don't need to depend on any kind of middleman to be able to access the data. Using the benefits of Web3, it's easily accessible from wherever you want and in a decentralized fashion. So what's really is powering Web3? So like I mentioned, the concepts behind Web3 are blockchain, the decentralized technology, and the token-based economies. And if you search on net, there's going to be a long list of terms related to Web3, and probably it's not in the scope of this talk to cover everything, but I just made an attempt to at least highlight a few important ones that we can talk about. So what is powering Web3 is the blockchains. If you don't know already what the blockchain is, in a very layman terms, it's a way of bookkeeping where multiple computers who are connected to each other are hosting the same copy of data, and not just the data. There's also ways where the smart contracts or the smart digital contracts are also hosted by these same computers. Cryptocurrencies, which is kind of the medium of exchange on any of the blockchain networks, like we just spoke about. NFTs, which even though they are tokens, they're not exactly same as the cryptocurrencies. The way they are differentiated is they have a uniqueness, inbuilt into them, so they cannot be exchanged at equivalency, and they can be used to represent any real-world items or identity or assets that is out there. Crypto wallet, which is a mechanism for a user to store securely their private keys, which helps them eventually using that to connect to a decentralized network or a blockchain and access the decentralized applications. dApps, another popular term, it's popularly used. It's a short form for decentralized applications. These are the applications just like any other web application. The only difference being, instead of a centralized database, you have a blockchain backing as a backend of these particular services. That's what makes it a dApp. Smart contracts, these are the digital contracts, that are self-executing and with an agreement of all the participants in the network. They are in a transparent manner deployed on the network. Then DAOs, like we briefly touched upon earlier, these are community-led entities, which do not rely on any centralized authority, but in a very transparent and autonomous manner, they leverage the smart contracts to basically regulate the decision making. And usually, the way to participate in DAO is using the ownership of tokens at that particular network. And finally, DeFi, which is again a short form of decentralized finance. It's an umbrella term of all the financial instruments where you don't have to rely on any of the brokerages, exchanges, banks, but just use the benefits of smart contracts on a blockchain, and any financial service you could use it in a decentralized and transparent manner. And it has other benefits like lower cost and faster transactions. So I didn't want this particular talk to go technical, but just want to make sure there is some level of visualization that I'm able to give you. So this is just a repetition of what I just said. Typically, if you look at the left side of this slide, typically a Web2 application, when a user accesses the application through a browser, there's a front end, but the back end is a centralized database. But if you look at the picture on the right side, which is a Web3 architecture representation, it's the same front end. The only thing is the backend and the database, the two blocks, the two blue blocks in the left diagram have been replaced by a blockchain, in this case, an Ethereum blockchain. So that's how, at a high level, a Web3 application architecture looks like. And here is a closer look. So since, we don't need to sign up, explicitly provide information, it's like an anonymous way where you can connect to a network. So this is a more meaty diagram of a Web3 application architecture. Here, not just the front end and the blockchain, you'll also see the user leveraging a particular crypto wallet, which is MetaMask in this particular picture, to be able to authenticate themselves in the application. And then there is another purple piece of block towards the right, which is the IPFS. So what that means is, the data that is being saved in the backend is not the entire data, rather it's just few references, but the actual data or the assets in this particular architecture are stored on another decentralized system, which is IPFS. Right. So now that we have seen, what the benefits are, so let's take a look at some of the limitations of Web3. So like, I said, this is still in evolution. So there are a lot of rough areas which still need to be polished. It will go through iterations and go to the teething problems, and then eventually, become more mature. So today, the way it is right now, it's not the perfect user experience. It's a bit complicated for beginners, whether it is the developers or the end users. They need some kind of training and education before they're able to join this particular evolution. Then accessibility. So there's not that seamless level of integration with the browsers yet. You need to sometimes utilize multiple crypto wallets and understand, the importance of security of private keys and flip between the networks, flip between the wallets sometimes depending upon what kind of networks your wallet is using. So there is a certain hurdle to adoption, even in terms of accessibility. It's not that accessible as of yet. The next point is scalability. So because it's a decentralized network where the transactions are broadcasted to everybody in the network and they validate and then it is accepted. What that means is the transaction have to go through a lot of validation. So it makes them slower. So basically, which ends up taking a hit on scalability. Then there are some challenges regarding regulation, right? Because the users are anonymously connecting to the network. You cannot track back any wrongdoing as a regulator and figure out who's the person who was the culprit if there was some sort of a laundering that happened. So this is the challenge. Also, since there are no jurisdictions in this distributed network, there could be multiple countries, multiple jurisdictions involved. So there is a challenge, coming up with a mature set of regulatory strategies and rules. So there's a lot of things going around in the space of regulation, where not just first of all the regulators need to understand the technology itself, and then see how they can marry that into what the current rules are and adapt themselves accordingly. Then it's the identity. Now that you're the owner of your identity, it becomes your responsibility. But the inherent nature of blockchain, public blockchain specifically, is even though your identity is secure, but the activities that you're doing, it's being broadcasted to everybody, all the nodes in the network. So there is a lot of transparency, and which is sometimes basically inviting users to dig information, and then it can be a threat to your identity if you're not properly modeling the solutions or using the application. So there are some concerns about energy efficiency also, as we know that Bitcoin and Ethereum, these are very high energy consumers with very large carbon footprint, because behind the scenes they are using a consensus mechanism which is called a proof of work. And what it does is it consumes a lot of energy for a transaction to be validated. There are alternatives like proof of stake being offered, and maybe Ethereum will soon move to this particular consensus mechanism. But it also has its own challenges of inequity issues, because in proof of stake, essentially what is happening is you're staking your collateral, and as a return, you're getting kind of access rights or rights to make changes to the network. So more collateral. So if you're rich, you get more control, and it's a way for you to become even more rich. So that's one of the limitations as well. And there are a lot of security threats, because it's a novel design. The standards are evolving. There's lack of expertise. Even now, the way we model the application, the smart contracts, so they are being hacked because of the lack of security mechanisms that are being followed. Then there are challenges like crypto jacking or rug pulls and ice fishing. These are some of the challenges where the miscreants would actually sometimes use other users' computer to mine, or sometimes create a hype and collect all the investment and then just run away. Or sometimes spoof a user and pull them into signing a transaction or authorizing a transaction where they can then take a benefit of that. And also, since Web3 is about being open source, the code is open for anybody to analyze, so it's susceptible to attacks by the hackers. So here are a few pieces of criticism. So recently, the Twitter's founder Jack Dorsey shared some of the concerns regarding ownership, where he said, Web3 is nothing but just a different label, where inside it's just still a centralized entity. It's the venture capitalists and the LPs that are making the benefits out of that, and behind the scenes, because they are the ones who are owning majority of the stake. Well, while this is true in some cases, but there are some very genuine protocols like Bitcoin and Ethereum that have been steady, and they have not sacrificed the decentralization essence of them in favor of making it more easy for people to use, or in favor of speed, or market worthiness. So there's a balance involved in this. There's good and there's bad, like any other solution out there. And even if let's say there are some VCs or central parties who are calling the shots, but because the rules, the smart contracts are publicly put into the system, it's not like Facebook where they can just change or mutate the rules anytime they want. This has to go through consensus still. So at least that benefit is definitely there. Then there was another comment by Moxie, who was the founder of Signal, where he's very rightly highlighting that the Web3 applications as of today, they, even though there's a blockchain or decentralized system behind the scenes, but then there are other layer of centralized platforms through which the users are accessing these blockchains. So this doesn't look like the end solution. So the way we should rethink our the next version of or evolve the Web3 is, we have to think in a way where you can't expect the users to become part of the network and spawn a server and join the network and then use the applications. We have to make it very simple and somehow leverage more the cryptography aspect instead of the distributed infrastructure to be able to actually evolve into the right version of the Web3. So where are we in this entire journey? Let's take a quick look at it. So for a long time, it's been there for around a decade or more than that, but it's remained like a theoretical grand vision for the most part. But with recent popularity of NFTs and other digital assets, it's gained all the attention. And what that means is now it has opened some avenues for the creators, artists. It's an economy that really supports them. Now they can create their content and monetize without passing the cuts to the middlemen or going through traditional gatekeepers. There are games today that are leveraging blockchain behind the scenes, where as a user now, that any content that you're creating or assets you're creating within a game, you can take them with yourself and then go to another game and use that. That's already happening today. And there's a lot of action in the DeFi space as well, where the companies are leveraging the digital decentralized solutions and passing on the low cost, instant transfers and low barrier to entry for people who cannot actually, get easily onboarded otherwise to the systems hosted by the big financial institutions. Then it also there's proven concepts that there is emerging support of the DAO's governance model, where a community-owned consensus basically is driving the network. So the bigger question is, will, with all these benefits and some of the challenges, will it eventually, Web3, will it eventually wrestle the control away from the larger organizations? From a lot of reading that I've done, a lot of experts believe that that will not be the case. Web3 essentially will work alongside Web2, and it's not going to throw it away. In fact, some of the Web2 companies are looking into the concepts of Web3 and trying to ingest those ideas into their platforms. For instance, Twitter is looking into Web3 concepts, and it is trying to find ways where, as a user, you could, associate your blockchain account and then using that log onto the network and then tweet. And Facebook itself, it rebranded itself as Meta, and it's envisioning a metaverse, which is a virtual reality world where the main principle behind the proponent behind this, they want to build robust interoperability, and users who could take their data, their avatars, everything from one side to the other or another service. So it does look like there's going to be like a complementary relation. It's not going to be one or the other. So what do we expect going forward? What are we seeing more and more, and what will we see in next coming months and years? So there are going to be more innovation and more innovative use cases that will come in light. Today, a lot of people, when you talk about NFT, they think about it as a way to just share high def images or things like that. But I think it's just initial set of use cases, but there's a lot more use cases that will come our way. The wallets are going to become more and more important. They will be the de facto for a user to be able to prove their digital identity, to gain access to their assets, and it'll let you move from a venue to venue, site to site, service to service in a private way. And more, as user get access or become owner of their own data, they'll be able to monetize the data in a much easier way as compared to the central organizations monetizing it today. There'll be more independence from the centralized platforms. We'll see a lot of transparency, inclusivity, and a lot of blockchain-based social networks, transactions, and businesses. So finally, to summarize, even though the idea is kind of, it's a talk of seismic shift in the behavior, and it may sound like it's a very far-fetched idea, but essentially the roots of the vision, what Web3 is trying to portray, they are sound. And those who are early adopters, they do see the value in it, and they'll go through the evolution and help in disrupting the true potential of Web3. Thank you, everyone. I think I went a little above than the time I was intending to, but hopefully I didn't bore you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If not, you could also email me at the email addresses shown on the screen.
Thank you, Sahil. That was a great presentation. Let's give our audience members a couple of seconds to send in their questions.
Sure.
All right. So the first question is the trend for Web3 crypto payments on platforms currently stable? Coins, traditional, crypto, or both?
Could you repeat that once more?
All right. Is the trend for Web3 crypto payments on platforms currently stable? For example, coins, traditional, crypto, or both?
Yeah, I think it is stable. There are a lot of solutions out there leveraging the benefits of crypto payments. Even though, one thing when you're as a developer working on the particular solution, you need to make sure you take into account all the security mechanism, all the guidelines. There are some, vetted contracts out there. There are some security tools to analyze your solution. There are auditors, so you should go through all that. But eventually, I would say the trend itself is stable.
All right. What is your opinion about the future applications of Web3 and semantic web in education?
So this is one thing when I was doing research, I found Web 3.0 is interchangeably being used as Web 3 in some places, and there are different. What I spoke about is Web 3, which is which is about decentralization and taking the controls away from the central authorities towards the users. Web 3.0 is like an Uber vision, which contains Web 3 as a subset, but what it talks about is a semantic web, which essentially means is it's more about able to interconnect the data on the net. Today, what we have is a lot of web pages are out there, and there is an interconnection between the pages themselves or the document themselves, but the data itself is not connected. And what I mean by that is, if let's say I have some information of myself put in a network, I have to go to another application and again enter the same information about myself. Versus this, there in the semantic web, there will be a version of the web where I just put information in one central place and everybody through the relations is able to access that. So that really is what the semantic web's vision is.
All right. How do companies decide if and how to join Web3 space?
Right. I would say definitely not just follow the hype. You need to really look into your vision. See if your product is naturally eligible for leveraging the benefits. For example, if you can see areas where you can automate some workflows or reduce admin time, save processing time by decentralizing. There's a lesser conflict resolution or reconciliation needed, or if there are things in your platform or assets which are changing hands or transferring ownerships, then you may be somebody who might want to look into Web3 solutions.
All right, Sahil, thank you so much. Thank you for joining this session, and it was an amazing session.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time.